23 minutes past the hour. This is the Craig Fahle Show on WDET. Thank you for tuning in. We're going to continue on talking about money for a little while. A guest on this program before was Jim McTevia. He's a management and financial consultant with offices in Bingham Farms. He has now written a book taking a look at the national debt situation called The Culture of Debt, How a Once Proud Society Mortgaged Its Future. Jim McTevia, welcome to the Craig Fahle Show.
Thank you. It's my pleasure.
Well, the culture of debt, I can see perhaps, our personal finances as being fueled by debt. The boom cycle that we had in the 1990s that, of course, has come crashing to a halt in this decade seems certainly to be fueled by personal debt. This book tends to focus more on the national debt, but is there a link?
Yeah, there's a direct link, of course, because the national debt is driven by the people in the legislatures, both of local, state, and federal government, and of course they were once upon a time us. What is happening in Washington and in any other municipality and state is that the legislators, our congressmen, are spending money that does not belong to us, and they did not learn that in Washington. I mean, Washington does not have a lock on that methodology.
Well, have they ever had a lock on that methodology, though? If you look at it, there's been significant national debt throughout our entire history in this country. There have only been a couple of dips. I think Andrew Jackson maybe whittled it down a significant portion, but for the most part, with a few dips here and there, it has been steadily on the increase.
Not true. There was a period of time back in the early 50s when the country was in debt, no question about it at all. But it was not to the magnitude where they are borrowing money to pay interest on debt that exists. Our country has never had debt of this magnitude.
In terms of sheer numbers or percentage of GDP or what?
Sheer numbers.
Okay.
Sheer numbers.
Because, looking at it's some things that John Steele Gordon wrote about this recently. He wrote a history of the national debt. And he said, this was back in 2009, of course, but at 8.3% of GDP is what he said, the deficit at least, was not something that was threatening the nation's stability at this point in time. He said he didn't like where the trends were going, for sure. But as a percentage of where we are, we're not adding significantly to that debt load.
I don't think you can measure the crisis that I see with GDP at all. You cannot measure what I see facing this country and our grandchildren. There is no way that the government is going to spend or tax its way out of this debt. There has got to be a very, very severe and dramatic cut in entitlement and services. We simply can't afford to do what we're doing.
Well, it's interesting when you look at that, though. I was watching the Sunday talk shows just yesterday, as a matter of fact, talking, and nobody is willing to make that assertion in this political world. Despite all the talk we have about curing America's spending problem, nobody is willing to suggest that we need to go there.
No, of course not. You're not going to get elected by telling people you're going to take things away from them that they have come to believe is theirs. Nobody will ever get elected that way. I have not seen and have yet to see, even as close as we are to this midterm election, one single politician at any level saying, vote for me, and I promise I won't spend money that doesn't belong to us.
And at the same time, though, if they do go in there and make serious cuts to entitlement programs, they'll be portrayed as a Trojan horse. They'll be voted out the next time around. So what's the solution to this?
Well, my opinion is the solution will only come when somebody takes the checkbook away from government. That has been my experience through my 50-year career. Every single client that I've ever had has continued to go further and further in debt as long as somebody is willing to loan them the money. And when China says no, and Japan says no, and nobody buys our bonds, and the value of the dollar is so deflated because we got so much floating out there, that's it. They're going to have to stop because there's no place for it.
My guest right now is Jim McTevia, author of The Culture of Debt, Why a Once Proud Society Mortgaged Its Future. Take a look at that situation. It does seem that people saying no has happened a lot more, at least on the consumer side of things. On the citizen side of things, credit is much more difficult to come by, whether it's for a mortgage or a car payment, credit cards. That's all dried up in the wake of the financial crisis. It's loosening a little bit right now, but so much of our economic growth was fueled on the continuing issuance of credit.
Absolutely.
So it's happening on a personal level. You've got savings rates going up for the first time in decades in this country. Is this the kind of thing that can be a model for government?
It can start. What you just explained and related is somebody saying no. The reason why credit card charges are dropped and why consumer spending and credit has dropped is because the institutions that make credit available have tightened up, and that is exactly what I'm suggesting is necessarily going to happen to the federal government, or they'll continue to borrow.
At the same time, though, when you have people that, again, are tapped out, which is basically what's happening, you've got a number of people unemployed. Everybody says that is the time that normally you would expect deficit spending in a government is to counteract the effects of a recession. So is that the kind of thing that you'll be able to continue to do, or is it a realistic thought on the part of people that the government might be there to help them out in a tough time?
No, I don't think the government's going to be there to help us in a tough time. I think the tough times are here. I do not, by any stretch of the imagination, think that our country has overcome the hurdle of what we commonly refer to as the Great Recession. I think that we are just in a valley. I think the Great Recession is continuing. I think it will continue, and for one simple reason, and that is we have a government that has grown so dramatically huge beyond the understanding of the normal voter. There are more people, employees on the bureaucratic payrolls of this country than there are that are working. I mean, there's so few supporting so many, and the use. There was a column today that was reported by David Brooks, who writes for the New York Times, and he brought out the fact that that the government has got money, but it uses the money in a frivolous way. That just is not using money correctly. And the reason they don't use the money correctly is because of the electoral process, and the fact is these politicians are promising their constituents things that they absolutely and positively have no right promising them, period.
So what's the solution to that problem? Because, again, politicians are there, and they do have responsibility to their constituents, and part of what they sell themselves as is somebody that brings home the bacon to the district. Look, I was able to bring $5 billion to the district, re-elect me. So who should be in charge of the purse strings, if not the Congress?
Well, my book suggests that there is a debt czar, but whoever that person would have to be inside of a Cheyenne Mountain, guarded 24 hours around the day, NORAD. And when somebody says, "I want to do this," the response is not with my checkbook. You're not going to do it. Now, let me say, I'm not going to take pot shots at any kind of policies or perks or entitlements, but I will say that it is in my heart is that we will not solve this problem until a new generation is educated in schools and comes to a realization that you cannot spend money that you don't have. They will elect representatives that will do that, and over a generation you will see a change. But it is my humble opinion that you will not see a change in the foreseeable future, because politicians will continue to promise and get money from wherever they can get it as long as they can.
My guest right now, Jim McTevia, his new book, The Culture of Debt, How a Once Proud Society Mortgaged Its Future, taking a tough look at government spending and frankly, the way the government operates. You suggest this is a generational thing, yet we seem to be stuck in these sort of cycles where we'll give one party a couple of years to figure it out, then we won't really, then another party will come in. Nobody really changes anything. So what's it going to take? Is it, you honestly think that we've got to start now with the first graders, and maybe by the time they're voting age, they'll start thinking about this?
I believe that the children of the next generation that are going to get educated in the basic fundamentals of plain old reading, writing, and arithmetic should have another course called financial management, where they are not learning how to manage their finances by watching what their parents are doing, because quite frankly, what most parents do is absolutely wrong. It is wrong. It's setting a very poor example, and these are the people that have elected the politicians in Lansing. And as I say in the book, as Pogo said in Earth Day, we want to know who the enemy is. We look around, he finds out that he's us. We can't continue to blame the people in Washington for the things they do. My gosh, they were once upon a time us, and we elected them. We sent them there. We've never sent them with a mandate to stop spending money, with a mandate to lower the size of government dramatically, with a mandate to curtail entitlements, curtail services. You know, I'm getting into Social Security. I'm getting into all kinds of very, very sensitive and serious issues. But somebody's got to get into them. Somebody's got to take the checkbook out of the hands of Washington and say, you can only spend so much this year.
So do we know what that limit is? I mean, is there a set amount that you look at that we could say, okay, this is how much we're allowed to spend this year if we're actually going to put a dent in this? Because we're talking about a multi-trillion-dollar budget.
We're already unable to balance the budget, for gosh sakes. Forget about even taking a whack at the national debt. We can't even balance the budget. If we can't balance the budget, then that means that we're adding to the national debt. And if we can't pay any principal on the national debt because we're borrowing money to pay the interest on it, I mean, common sense would tell that it has to stop through a combination, as I say in my book, of one of three things. You either cut expenses, increase income, revenue, or a combination of both. And I suggest in my book that I'd be a lot more prouder to pay higher taxes than I'm paying now, and most Americans would if they felt that their tax dollars were going for worthwhile causes. Now you say, well, everybody's got their own idea of what a worthwhile cause is. What I mean is a cause where the expense of government has been cut ahead of time. You don't immediately increase revenues in any financial problem-solving situation. You don't run out and borrow money to solve problems. You have to cut expenses.
Well, Mr. McTevia, it's one of the things that's very obvious in this book. You don't have a lot of faith that this is going to get done.
I don't.
So is it going to take China turning off the spigot?
It's my opinion that eventually somebody is going to say no. And when that happens, there are going to be a bunch of people in Washington that are going to say, whoa, nobody's never said that to us before. What do we do? And then we have what people fear will happen. You will have a sovereign default. And when that happens, there will be a restructuring of the federal debt in some fashion, which is the same thing that you do in commercial. There will be a restructuring. Somebody's going to get a haircut. And the government is going to have to live within its means. Taxes will go up, services will go down, population will be very unhappy. What happens to unhappy populations? Well, go back in history. French revolutions, is the president's head going to get cut off? Of course not. But, the gap between those that have and those that have not is probably at the widest that it's ever been in the history of this company. When a man can't feed his family, and when a man sees people in Wall Street and making fortunes and spending lots of money and Congress getting paid lots of money, what's a man going to do when he can't feed his family? Is he going to take to arms? Is there going to be an uprising? I do not know. I assume that once the government has a sovereign default, that the people in Washington will be smart enough to start cutting overhead.
One of the things we hear is that we can grow our way out of this.
Not in a million years. Not in a million years. We're struggling to retain our strength as the leading economic force on this globe. And anyone who has any sense at all can read the papers and see that is very slowly evaporating.
Do you have any sort of sense when the day of reckoning is going to come?
I really don't. Somebody's got to say no, Somebody's got to take the checkbook away from Washington. There will probably be a number of years of pain. But I would like to, I suspect, and I'd like to suggest that the earlier we do something, the less the pain is going to be.
Well, we'll leave it right there. Jim McTevia, thank you very much for your time. We certainly appreciate talking to you today. So I wish it was a little more cheerful, but at the same time, a lot of people are already going through this themselves. So
absolutely. Thank you so much.